evening. I want to thank Sasha for bringing us our speaker today. I think she offers a very unique background and perspective. She was born in Munich, Germany, and graduated high school there, but she came to the U.S. and ended up getting a PhD in international studies at the University of Miami. By the way, her name is Dr. Melanie Goergmaier. She got her PhD in May of 2020. She specialized in international relations and international political economy. She focused on European Union studies and trade politics. So you can see what we're in for, some very interesting perspectives, I would suggest. She holds a master's degree in business administration from Elon University from the University of North Carolina, and a bachelor's degree from business administration from Catawba College in North Carolina. Please welcome via Zoom, Dr. Melanie Goergmaier.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you for having me. And I will share a few aspects of my research with you, which focuses on trade relations between the European Union and the United States. European Union, United States trade relations, because historically this has always been an important issue when we think that trade has actually led to the American Revolution, obviously. But then nowadays, trade is also very important because it's not just something that is, one sectoral issue by itself, because it overlaps into so many other areas today. And even we have a lot of similarities that are happening, that happened historically, and today they're applicable again. For example, back in the 1930s, the protectionist approach that the US took at the time sort of contributed to the Great Depression, and that was caused by retaliatory tariffs. And this is something similar that we have seen recently under the Trump administration, this protectionist approach leading to trade wars and then retaliation by trading partners around the world, such as China. And even with the European Union, there was a lot of tension when it came to slapping tariffs on both sides of the Atlantic and almost engaging into a trade war. Now, historically, it was basically that approach didn't work too well, which is why the US took a different approach than later on in the 1930s, engaging into bilateral trade deals, which actually helped the US climb out of the Great Depression and into a position of global leadership. And now, after the Trump administration approach, obviously the Biden administration may take a different approach and try to work again with the European Union as an ally when it comes to trade. And especially since there's a lot of trade competition around the world, obviously, especially with China. And so it would be important for the EU and the US to sort of team up. And if we look at it from a historical perspective, these trade agreements, so to speak, have always led to a better economic outcome when we look at some of the numbers. So the approach to engage in bilateral trade agreements has been successful over the years. If we look at it starting from when World War II ended until today, and especially under the WTO framework, under the World Trade Organization framework, that has been quite successful for the US. And this is why usually pretty much almost every US president was able to get what they call trade promotion authority, where actually Congress gives them the authority to negotiate trade agreements. So this is usually something that obviously both the Republicans and the Democrats are usually supportive of, or that's something that they actually agree upon in the US, that negotiating trade agreements is beneficial. And we can also see this when we look at the growth of trade among the World Trade Organization members, starting from the end of World War II to the 2000s. We can actually see that the decline of tariffs has been significant under the WTO framework, but obviously there are still tariffs out there that obstruct trade. And so what if the EU and the US could engage in such a trade agreement where they could further reduce those tariffs or maybe even eliminate them? Then that would basically create a big market, a big trade area, and that would certainly also make it harder for the competition to enter that market. Competition from any growing economies such as China, India, and all the other, significant trade entities around the world. So the European Union has, at the same time, just like the US, has been engaging in these bilateral trade agreements. But the question is, why have the US and the EU negotiated these trade agreements with other countries, but not with each other? So there have been a few reasons. Even though the European Union and the US are fairly similar economies when it comes to their development, they're pretty far developed and pretty equivalent in many aspects. However, there's always been obstacles such as tackling, for example, the economic and financial crisis in 2008. And then there's also been different philosophies. The European Union, more of a strong advocate of multilateralism due to having all these different member states. And the European Union was also for a while very much focused on enlarging, having new member states join. And really the European Union is more of a soft power, whereas the US can be seen more of a hard military power. So there's been definitely more philosophical differences, so to speak. The European Union has engaged in quite a few trade agreements around the world and even within Europe, because not every European country is part of the European Union. So the European Union does have trade agreements with quite a few, of these European countries that are not part of the European Union. And now even with Brexit, with the United Kingdom exiting the European Union, there was still this notion to have a trade agreement with them, obviously, because that would be beneficial for everyone. So when it comes to other areas around the world, Asia and Latin America, there's definitely a lot of opportunities there. So the European Union has negotiated some trade agreements with countries on those two continents. But then still the question, the United States is the largest economic trade and investment partner for the European Union, and vice versa, by the way. You might think that China is the largest economic trading partner for the US, but it's actually the European Union in a lot of aspects. And obviously there's different statistics when it comes to different areas that are being measured, but it would make total sense for the EU and the US to team up and, like I mentioned, create a bigger economic entity, more an economic growth, job creation. And not only that, also sharing the same or very similar political values. And even when it comes to things like environmental aspects, saving the environment and all these kind of things that could also be part of the trade agreement. So that would be obviously a very good goal to have. And I'm going sort of fast through the slides because I know we have limited time. So the European Union and the United States, like some of you may know, have actually attempted to, or have actually started negotiations for what they called at the time would have been the largest trade agreement in the world to date. So these negotiations started under the Obama administration and back in 2013, because there were many different studies done which showed that it would be very beneficial to have such a trade agreement. And by the way, even under the Trump administration, there was an independent research study conducted which came to the same conclusion that the European Union would be a very beneficial trading partner due to having so many different member states within the European Union that are economically powerful when you combine them. So there were actually a total of 16 negotiation rounds between 2013 and 2016 and as part of that trade agreement between the EU and the US. Most of the negotiation rounds took place in New York, Washington, D.C., Brussels, but one round actually took place in Miami. And that had to do with matters of, for example, sea level rise, things of that nature, environmental threats. So that's why that one particular negotiation round took place in Miami. And I actually had the opportunity to witness those trade negotiations because my boss at the European Union Center at the University of Miami, he has those kind of connections. He's a very recognized researcher in the field. And at the time when I was, pursuing my PhD dissertation, I had a chance to take part in that in 2015. And just to give you an idea of what was being negotiated, what kind of topics that you might not even think about necessarily when you think about trade, but a lot of different aspects go into trade agreements. For example, topics on the environment and labor. So there were different stakeholders present who presented to the trade negotiators, both the EU and the US trade negotiators. So they would present to them and say, hey, please make sure you consider these aspects when you negotiate this trade agreement. Please don't forget about us. And this is our point of view. So you have different environmental coalitions there, different unions, even humane society in terms of animal rights, any organizations related to public health, agriculture, and so that was one of the aspects. The other aspect that was being negotiated in that particular negotiation round was in regards to investment in services, data and telecommunications, and intellectual property rights. So this is very applicable for today, especially in the corona crisis when it comes to pharmaceutical opportunities. For example, vaccine development or any type of pharmaceuticals that, when you think about there goes a lot of money into the research, obviously, but then also the recognition. So when it comes to trade, it's not only always about reducing tariffs, but it could also be about mutual recognition. So for example, companies have to pay every time they export and import, and then that money gets passed on to the consumers. So there could be a lot of money could be saved if they were to say, okay, the EU and the US, they have very similar standards when it comes to pharmaceuticals. They have testing procedures and entities that have to improve them, institutions. So why not recognize each other's institutions if the process is very similar, instead of having the duplicate recognition again, because that's costly for companies, for the consumer, for everybody. So there's a lot of money that could be saved by mutual recognition. And then agriculture, market access goods, custom facilitation. There were quite a few stakeholders present as well when it comes to gene manipulated organisms, trying to lobby for, certain food standards and trying to avoid GMOs and so forth. That was very important for some of the stakeholders there. Here, so at the time, under the Obama administration, the trade negotiators were different at the time. Obviously now, and under the Trump administration, these trade negotiators changed, and now again under Biden, obviously they would be changing. So, but here is a picture that I took at the time for the chief negotiators on both sides, on the EU and the US side. They were basically presenting, they were holding a press conference and asking questions. And here, this is Professor Roy from the University of Miami European Union Center and Peter Wawrik from the European Parliament. They were basically there with me as well at the time. So the trade agreement between the EU and the US would be important, not only obviously for the tariff reduction and or mutual recognition of goods and services and so forth, but also to kind of write the rules, so to speak, the global rules. What are the best and fair trade practices, ethical, no subsidies, because we all know that China tends to subsidize a lot, and that kind of undermines the competition, because that could mean that a lot of the products that China offers are so cheap that US and EU companies cannot compete, and that kind of destroys the competition. So we've seen it a lot, obviously, when it comes to clothing or even things like solar panels. It could destroy a whole market. Like in California, it sort of destroyed some of the solar industry there because China was able to offer the solar panels so much cheaper. And the same was true, for example, in Germany. There was a solar panel industry trying to establish itself in Germany, but didn't survive too well due to China being able to offer those products, for much cheaper. So this is something that the European Union and the United States should team up on and work together in order to really establish those fair trade practices. And then if all these tariffs could be cut or reduced, it's much harder for an outside competitor such as China to try to compete and penetrate that market, obviously. So nowadays, the context for sustainability is also very important in these trade agreements, especially if they're with large entities such as the EU and the US. So everything pretty much is pretty interdependent here. So we're talking about an overlap of economic, environmental, and social interests that have to be addressed in these type of trade agreements. And so why did this trade agreement actually not happen? Why did the negotiation after 16 rounds, why did it not come to fruition? So a lot of obstacles happened along the way that kept prolonging the process. First, there was this NSA scandal where it was revealed that the US was monitoring some of the European population and even officials. And then the Ukraine conflict started. Then there was a migration crisis in Europe that the European Union had to deal with. Then Brexit started happening. There was always something. Then there was the US presidential election. And like I mentioned, the trade agreement actually did not come to fruition even under Obama. But then when Trump came into office, his priority was not trade agreements, right? He said, okay, no trade agreements. And he was engaging into the trade war. He was slapping steel and aluminum tariffs on China and on the European Union. Later on, then started negotiating some aspects with the European Union, little agreements here and there, but nothing big. And now it would really be up to the Biden administration to hopefully continue where it was left off, because the European Union has expressed an interest to engage in these negotiations again. And obviously on both sides of the Atlantic, the negotiations function a little bit different. In the US, it's a little bit easier when it comes to the process, because like I mentioned, usually when the Senate or Congress gives authorization to the president to negotiate, then there's just a yes or no vote on the agreement. In the European Union, it's a little bit more complicated. There's more entities controlling the process. The European Commission negotiates, and then the European Parliament controls the conclusion. The Council controls negotiations, and also the public has a lot more interest usually into these negotiations. So that could have been another reason why the agreement didn't come to fruition either, because there was a lot of public pressure within the European Union about this agreement. Some of the population, they were a little bit scared because in the US, there tends to be a lot more hormone-treated meat or genetically manipulated food, and some of the European consumers were a little bit concerned that might affect them. And also, some of the data protection laws are much harsher in the European Union than the US. So that was an issue at the time. There was a lot of fear in the European population about that trade agreement. So some of the reasons why that was also, it was definitely an obstacle for the negotiations. When we look at it overall, though, to kind of summarize, there would definitely, with a trade agreement between the EU and the US, there would be increased legal security, not only political and economic, because it would pose an opportunity to kind of work jointly finding solutions for climate change, sea level rise, whatever the case, public health challenges, especially now with the corona crisis. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity for working together on pharmaceuticals, anything, vaccine development. And then obviously the most important aspect, it could create an economic powerhouse, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises who cannot afford to pay these tariffs, because we all know that the big multinational corporations, they can afford to pay the tariffs. So I could go on and on about this, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna sort of conclude here, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. This maybe just, yeah. I'll be happy to take some questions from the audience, if there are any.
Thank you, Dr. Goergmaier. Let me go to the room and ask questions. Let me do any.
One of the great challenges we have with trade is Chinese stealing intellectual property from all over the world. Is this ever going to change? Is their government ever going to do anything to pressure them? Or is it going to take Chinese companies having their own inventions stolen by others before their government will step in and do something?
Yeah, that is a great question. And so this is why I think this trade agreement would be very important, because both the European Union and the United States have tried that. They, you know, so obviously there's also international rules in place for that, where they're supposed to follow the patent rules, but sometimes China just doesn't. You know, they actually just don't follow the rules, and because there's no world government, so to speak, nobody is really in charge or in control of doing anything about it. So one of the best way to fight that, so to speak, would be in a way with a trade agreement, because then it's much harder for China to try to compete with that, and especially with intellectual property rights. Once that is part of the trade agreement, and if the EU and the US stick to those rules, it creates a lot of protection for a much bigger market than if the US is on its own and the European Union is on its own. But if they team up, that could definitely help reduce some of those threats, intellectual property rights threats, and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Goergmaier. For our next question, we go to Jim O'Reilly.
Good afternoon. We've heard quite a bit about the impact of Britain leaving the EU from Britain's perspective. What is the EU's perspective on Britain's leaving?
Well, the European Union is very sorry to see Great Britain go, because Great Britain was a major contributor in the economy. So that's why, but it is what it is. It's their decision. Nobody can force them to stay. It's in their right to leave. And so the European Union is very interested in continuing a trading relationship with Great Britain. So it wouldn't be as beneficial as if they were a member, because if they are a member, there's no tariffs. That's part of the benefit of being a European Union member. But now that they're left, there will be tariffs, but that's why negotiating some sort of trade agreement with them would be very important for the European Union, because then they could try to reduce those tariffs as much as possible. So it would be beneficial for both sides, for the UK and for the European Union, to still benefit from each other's economic aspects as much as possible.
Thank you. For our next question, we go to Catherine Simmons.
Thank you for your time and for a great presentation. Really appreciate it. Just curious, unless we eliminate trade with China entirely, then even if we team up as the United States with the EU, how could we compete with China, given that our current administration has a focus on climate change and raising the minimum wage and social issues, and being as litigious as we are, and then we're trying to compete with a country. I believe China produces more greenhouse emissions than every other developed country combined in the world, and with their human rights violations and things of that nature, it seems like unless we just eliminated them as a trading partner, we would always come up short because, I mean, they're shutting the pipeline down and all these things that we're doing to take our own legs out from underneath us. I don't see how that, it's a great thing to wish for, but I don't see how it can happen realistically.
Yes, so one of the solutions forward would be to really have, like, let's say if the European Union and the United States were able to form a trade agreement, then that would mean it wouldn't totally eliminate China, but it could reduce China's impact because if you create, like, let's say you have small and medium-sized enterprises or even large enterprises who can now all of a sudden have a bigger market. So it's kind of like you're not only trading within the US, but you could trade with all the European Union for free. And so that would actually substitute some of the products potentially from China. So it would create a huge opportunity for entrepreneurship. This trade agreement could create more than 200,000 new jobs. And, you know, just by transferring technology and creating cost advantages by common service management. So there's a lot of opportunity there to make it harder for China to penetrate a bigger economic powerhouse. It wouldn't completely eliminate China, but it would certainly help against that fierce competition.
Okay. Thank you. For our next question, we go to Tom Wright.
Oh, right. A subject I'm quite familiar with. The Trump administration was against the trade agreement with the EU, not just for a multitude of social reasons, but for the very simple reason, let's take Germany, for example. Their car companies were charging major tariffs on our cars going to Germany to keep them out, and yet we weren't charging any tariffs on their cars coming in. Why in the world wouldn't we? Our previous administrations did the American public wrong by not charging tariffs in reciprocation. What do you have to say about that? Just curious, not putting on the spot.
Yes, that's a good point. There are some tariffs, but you're right that they were significantly lower. So here are the numbers. So when the EU exports cars to the US, it's only a 2.5%. So there are tariffs, but not as high as the other way around. You're totally correct. And so this is something that would have to, so in the trade agreement that was already negotiated, it just wasn't implemented, these tariffs would be eliminated for both sides. So the US would majorly benefit from that. So that's actually a great example.
Thank you. For our next question, we go to Stuart Marshall.
I noticed you have charity up there for negotiations, Humane Society. What interest would charities have in this? What interest would Humane Society have?
I'm sorry, I was having trouble hearing the acoustic.
The question was in the graph that you showed, you had one of the interested parties in the negotiation was the Humane Society. What interest would they have in negotiations?
Okay, yeah, so because sometimes in certain trade agreement aspects, animals could be affected. For example, the trade of animals, especially in Florida, there's a lot of animals that are supposed to be protected and not traded, especially reptiles. So they wanted to make sure that they actually protect the reptiles because there's a lot of illegal trade going on with reptiles, with snakes and even alligators and crocodiles. And you wouldn't believe how many times the US Border Protection or Customs, they catch somebody trying to trade animals like that. So they were just making sure that the trade agreement between the European Union and the United States would have rules in regards to that to protect animals.
Dr. Goergmaier, can you give us a little bit of insight how you can negotiate when you have so many parties attending? It looked like you could easily list 30 or 50 parties, and how do you come to an agreement with all of those special interests they're pulling in every which direction?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and that's why it's so difficult, and that's why I guess they did not come to an agreement. But the way it works, and I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to be there, they have basically different small rooms where they have different presentations. And so there's a chief US trade negotiator appointed by the president. But then underneath that trade negotiator, you have many trade negotiators who sit in on the different presentations, and then they take notes. And then basically later on, once they meet in their team under the US trade negotiator, then they will bring it all together and say, okay, we need to pay attention to this, we need to pay attention to that. And the European Union would do the same thing with their people. And it does take a long time. That's why the negotiations took 3 years. The problem with this particular agreement, it's very comprehensive and very big. Let's say if you make it smaller, then it might be easier to come to an agreement. For example, to say, let's leave agriculture out because we have so many disagreements. The agricultural lobby in the US is very strong. So what if we leave out the agricultural aspect and just negotiate maybe pharmaceuticals? It might be easier to come to an agreement. So the larger the trade agreement is, the harder to come to a conclusion.
Okay, thank you. For our next question, we go to Mike Swindle.
I have a two-part question. The Scottish Nationalist Party is scheduling another vote on devolution from Scotland to be separated from England and the rest of the United Kingdom. What effect will that have on the European Union? And second question is, what is the status of Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland in the south? What is the status on the border there? And thank you so much for your guidance.
Yes, that's another very interesting question. So the European Union would welcome Scotland leaving the UK because Scotland wants to, because then they would probably join the European Union, and the European Union would welcome that very much because it would be beneficial for trade and for other aspects. And so this is an irony. It would be bad for the UK, but it will be great for the European Union. And that's one of the reasons why Scotland is having that referendum, by the way, because they obviously disagree with leaving the European Union. They would like to, or the majority of the population would like to rejoin the European Union because they were basically forced out. And the difficulty with Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's something similar because Ireland is part of the European Union, but then Northern Ireland is not because it happens to be, on the other side of the island. So it's very very important. So basically of the war, the European Union has nothing to do with the war that was going on historically there. But the problem is once you create that border, because it's supposed to be part of the European Union, and once you create the border now with the UK with England, which is no longer part. So this is a very difficult issue actually that needs to be solved. And yeah, that's another lecture.
Okay. Dr. Goergmaier, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for your insights, your comments, and for taking so many questions. We've reached the end of our program, and now is the time for me to announce that next week we anticipate our speaker being Chris Anderson, the supervisor of elections for Seminole County, and he will be with us to discuss the impact of Senate Bill 90, the voting bill, on voters and on the election process. So please be with us for that. And now, as we close the meeting, remember, we are a business club, so do business with Rotarians. And now for the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? So as we adjourn, be safe, be well, be active, and be a Rotarian. Thank you all for being with us, and especially thank you, Dr. Goergmaier. We really enjoyed your talk.